we start off with just like an overview, high level description as to what regenerative agriculture really is?
This is so exciting. Regenerative agriculture is a way that we can manage our land to stabilize the climate. It's as simple as that. Regenerative agriculture is building soil, creating resiliency, and stabilizing microclimates. So, and it's happening around the globe right now. We're making a transition away from conventional industrialized agriculture and towards regenerative agriculture. And the difference is huge. One of them, we are destroying our local environment. It's extractive, it's linear, it uses chemicals and tillage. It's a method of farming that we stole techniques from war, such as the use of chemicals that were used to kill people. There was this great money-making machine that was invented through war, through these giant machines and poisons. And so when war ended, they decided to keep the money flowing by taking those machines and taking those chemicals and using them on our farms to kill bugs. And in doing so, we began spraying poisons on our food and into our environment. We ripped up the life that was in the soil through these giant tilling machines. And in doing so, we destroyed the life that was in our soil that is so critical to being able to grow nutrient-dense food, to be able to have microclimates that are resilient to fires and droughts and floods and other natural disasters that are becoming more and more unnatural because of the way that we're managing the land. And regenerative agriculture, it's really simple. It's using 6 principles and practices to keep the land covered at all times so that the moisture stays in. It allows nature to do what it does best, which is to move nutrition and to move life around to where it needs to be so that it can withstand these unnatural and natural disasters. And ultimately, it's farming the way that Indigenous people did before we came in and messed up everything. It's farming in nature's image. It's growing food that's good for our bodies, that's good for the environment, that's good for our communities. And it's not extractive. It's the opposite. It actually is incredibly abundant, and it creates a tremendous amount of wealth for the farmers who are practicing it. In fact, within 1 year, over 80% of farmers who transitioned away from conventional agriculture and to regenerative agriculture saw a profit. So the resiliency report talking about regeneration, that is a natural fit, because that is how we create resiliency for life on Earth, is through how we manage our land, specifically using regenerative agriculture. I forgot to mention the biggest benefit, actually. The biggest benefit, at least from my view, we're in such a state of paralysis around climate anxiety, and we have a carbon problem. And we talk about carbon as the enemy. We have too much carbon in the atmosphere, and we've flooded our oceans with carbon. It can't absorb anymore. We have ocean acidification as a result. There's only one place for that carbon to go. And the majority of that legacy load of carbon that's in the atmosphere came from, over 25% of it came from tilling up that soil and ripping that carbon up out of the ground. So there's one place for it to go, and only one place, and that's back into the soil. And the only way the soil can do that is if we take care of that soil and we build that soil and we allow it to draw down and biosequester that legacy load of carbon we've emitted. And in doing so, within 10 years, even less, we could begin to see the reversal of climate change and the stabilizing of our climate.
Are there any misconceptions that you would like to already dispel right from the get-go from our listeners when it might come to the topic of regenerative agriculture?
Right off the bat, people call regenerative agriculture like hopeism, or the idea that like it's this delusional thought that somehow we can stabilize the climate through biosequestration. Like we're adding hope to a place where there really is none. But based on what I've seen and based on people that I've interviewed, based on going out and seeing the soil that can be built on these farms, the soil organic matter, like inches and inches and feet of organic matter that can sequester and draw down carbon, I know that it's true. There's enough studies that have been done now. There's enough farmers that have seen it happen. And, maybe you can't talk to farmers about climate change, but you can certainly talk to them about the weather. And that is something that is directly affected by their farming practices. So maybe for some people, climate change isn't the way into the conversation. But another misnomer is that a farmer is taking a huge risk and will go broke if he makes that transition off of, like here in the United States, we have a lot of subsidies for farming and bank loans that force them to be locked into those subsidies and into those chemical sprays. And so it's really scary for a farmer to get out of that system because they don't have that crop insurance anymore that guarantees them money. And then what if a bug or a flood or a drought comes through or a fire? I mean, that could totally wipe out the farm. And I'm speaking from experience. I come from a legacy farming family. My dad was a conventional farmer who grew corn and soy. And so I've seen and witnessed within my own family firsthand the impacts of exposure to those chemicals. And so the cost really does outweigh the benefit of the quote unquote green revolution simply in the health and well-being of the families of those who are managing that land. So yes, farmers can make that transition and it can be profitable for them. And yes, it is scary, but that's the way forward, because what most people don't realize is that, at least in the United States, we have a suicide epidemic around farming. Farmers are 5 times more likely to commit suicide than any other profession in the United States. And that's because of this long-term degradation to the land, to their well-being, to their mental health. That's a result of the way that these farms are being managed with all these chemicals and tillage and constant stress, constant fear of not being able to make their bank payments. And then there's still some other misunderstandings, like people think cows are bad. And so a lot of what I do is educate people around it's not the cow, it's the how. If you have a cow and it's in confinement and it's being fed corn, yeah, that's not going to be the right place for that cow. That's not how a cow is meant to be managed. Cows are ruminants. They're meant to be in huge herds. They're supposed to have a very densely packed. They're supposed to be constantly on the move, like they would with wolves chasing them. And that's how Indigenous people worked with the bison. The bison followed the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota people because that's where the life was. And so they were following them around as they managed the land. And literally they created such regenerative, abundant environments that the life would come to them. That's how we should be managing the land, not trying to extract everything that we can out of it, spraying it with deadly chemicals and growing only one thing that then becomes completely susceptible to anything that might come through and knock it out. And then ultimately, lastly, like, can the carbon stay in the ground once it's been put in the ground? That's another big question. Another big question is, well, what about being vegan, eating less meat? Maybe that's the answer. All of these things are really important conversations, and they're all answered and talked about in our films, Kiss the Ground and Common Ground. And I could sit here and talk to you about it for hours and hours because I've learned so much through this process. But ultimately, every time there's been a really big concern that's been raised, nature has the answer here, and it's called regeneration. Regenerative agriculture is what was done for centuries, millennia before human beings came in with all of our tools and extractive techniques, and we didn't have a carbon problem. There were way more ruminants then than we have now, and we didn't have a greenhouse gas problem. It's how we've been managing those cows.
Spoke to farmers with all different backgrounds, whether they're Black or white or Indigenous. Were there any common themes that you saw across these stories in terms of both maybe risks and challenges they're facing, but especially I would love to talk about like those opportunities that they are seeing as they begin to step into it for some, and then for some it's what their culture has been doing for all of these generations. So are there any common themes that you've seen across those different farmers?
We all have a lot more in common than what we realize. But when we're in it and you're fighting for survival, it feels like those differences will tear us apart. And certainly in the United States, there's been discrimination against Black, Indigenous, people of color. Farming land has been taken away, land grants have not been given, loans haven't been given, insurance hasn't been given. So certainly BIPOC farmers have struggled more than their white farming counterparts who've been supported by the USDA in an unfair way. However, even those practices, that once you get into that system, that is a system of degradation. So everyone across the board has been affected by the quote unquote green revolution and the indoctrination of these chemicals and farming practices. I think, just speaking with my Indigenous friends, I think it's just another form of colonization, the colonization of seeds and the control and patenting of seeds. It's another way to have big business win and to have people lose. If you can control how you grow your food, that can be very destabilizing for large corporations and governments. But ultimately, that's how we win. We win when we empower BIPOC farmers. We win when we empower white farmers. We win when we empower women farmers. We win when we manage land in a way that mimics nature. That's how we win. And we have to recognize that we are all in this together. There is no one of us that's going to get out of this unscathed if we don't look at the bigger picture. And the way that each one of us can affect the bigger picture is by looking at what's directly around us and how we can affect that. So no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, finding ways to directly influence the way that the land in our immediate environment is managed. And I think that's why we ended up settling on calling the film and focusing on common ground, because it really does take all of us. It doesn't matter if you're blue or red or purple or rainbow colored. It really, this isn't something that is isolated to just one country, to one state, to one group of people. We have a small window of time to course correct our climate crisis. And the only way we can do that is through coming together and managing our land in a way that's regenerative. And that means overcoming a lot of these issues that divide us.
So in 2020, you and your husband released Kiss the Ground. And it was interesting because working in the sustainability space, a lot of my professional contacts who are deep in sustainability will reach out with all these different ideas. Have you read this book? Have you seen this movie? And it felt like with Kiss the Ground that all of a sudden my contacts who were even maybe just a little bit eco-curious were coming out of the woodwork and saying, have you seen this movie? You have to see it. It is changing the way I've thought about sustainability. So they were clearly not alone. I was reading some of the numbers of the viewership of this movie. Why do you think it struck such a chord with the broader audience?
Interesting moment when Kiss the Ground came out. It was September of 2020. So we were all on lockdown. We'd all watched Tiger King and we're bored. We were like sick of washing down our groceries. We were, feeling stir crazy at that moment in time. And through this series of miracles, we managed to get Kiss the Ground on Netflix at that moment. And it was, that was the dream. The dream was to take the message of regeneration and take it out to the mainstream. And it took us, 7 years at that moment. And now it's been over a decade of us working on these two films. And I think the reason it hit was because it had been 14 years since An Inconvenient Truth had come out. I think the conversation around the climate had hit an all-time low with young people, apathy. I think with older people, with parents. For me, it was like as a mom, deep distress around what the future would be for my children. So that paralysis was very real. And when people learned for the first time, that was how Kiss the Ground really affected people. It was their first time learning about regenerative agriculture for most people, was watching Kiss the Ground. And they didn't know that there was a pathway forward to stabilize the climate. That was an introduction for the mainstream around a possible solution to fix the planet. And that had not been a part of our conversation at that point. Basically, we had been talking about, paper straws and reducing emissions. And no amount of paper straws and reducing emissions was going to do a single thing about the legacy load of carbon that we have in our atmosphere and the havoc that that's wreaking around the planet, or the fact that that number continues to rise. So there's only one way that we can fix that problem, and that's through taking that carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it into healthy soil with the added benefit of helping farmers make a profit, creating resiliency within microclimates, creating abundance and a profit for those farmers, health for the farmers and the people who eat that food, and ultimately stabilizing the climate. So there's not really a downside. And so I think that's why the film became such a success. That's why it made such an impact. Didn't hurt that we had Woody Harrelson in the film. That definitely was a fun creative process. But, and for some farmers, it didn't help that Woody Harrelson was in the film. For some farmers, they were like, I don't know what Woody Harrelson is doing in this movie about farming or what he knows about farming, except for maybe hemp, ha, ha, ha. But then the same farmer would go on to say, but actually, I learned a lot and I'm trying out some of these things and it's working and I'm starting to see biodiversity and I'm starting to see bugs again in my fields. Like remember when you used to drive down the road and your windshield would get covered in insects? Since we've started farming, monocropping, and spraying with chemicals in this way, that those insects have disappeared. And that is a sign of the loss of life that's happening. And so when you start to see butterflies and pollinators and insects coming back, that's a sign of regeneration. That's a good thing. And I think that's what people are seeing. They're seeing a possibility for hope and a pathway for how we can fix the planet. And that's exciting. And people want to share that message because we've been stuck in doom and gloom for too long. And I think we're ready to take action.